A new Israeli government will take office soon. It is likely to include far-right and racist elements and parties. Israelis who are concerned about peace, democracy, and liberal values are a bit worried about this development. What are your expectations from the new government? What would you like to see happening? Will the UN engage with ministers like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir? Will it draw some red lines to possible Israeli actions?
Well, I've been in politics myself, and I just wait to see what the government formation will look like and where the positions will be before I take clear views on that one. I understand the concerns you're alluding to, but I hold my horses when it comes to exactly how we interact and how we intervene. I mean, UN will relate to any elected government, end of story. And we will have more or less space. That remains to be seen. There is one fact, however, that any government will have to address realities. And we will see how a new government in Israel will relate to the realities I described for you in my introduction. And we will see how to work it from there.
As a prelude to that, we heard Netanyahu saying this week that the Palestinians do not want peace, that they want a state instead of Israel, and that Israel-Saudi normalizations could end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And on top of that, Smotrich was saying today that human rights organizations in Israel are an existential threat to the country. What would you say to the large number of Israelis, unfortunately, who share these positions with these political figures? How would you convince them otherwise?
Well, first of all, I disagree flatly with the notion that the Palestinians don't want to have peace. And I'm saying that not out of analysis, I'm saying it because I know it. The road to there is difficult, not only for the Palestinians, but also for Israel. But the statement that they don't want peace is not true. What is true is that for as long as this is continuing like it is, and not only driven by Israel, there are counter forces on the Palestinian side that are growing in strength. They are Hamas, and they are Islamic Jihad, and they have both capacity to inflict a huge damage on Israel, and they have done it. For UN to operate the way we are, we need to be able to be in a position where, if need be, these guys will pick up the phone when we call them. There are very few in the international community that can intervene in escalations we saw in May last year or we saw in August this year, but we can, for that reason, that we keep the lines open. But keeping the lines open is something very different from giving any support to them. Well, when it comes to the internal discussion in Israel on how you develop your own democracy, your institutional capacity, and your systems around that, I think Israel is a very mature country that are totally able to kind of deal with these dynamics and take that out in the open the way I know it's going to be done.
Thank you. Regarding the international community and its work to advance peace, part of your role is also being the envoy to the Quartet. That includes the US and the EU and Russia. The Quartet was established 20 years ago this year. Doesn't seem to be very active or to have a big impact at the moment. What is the current status of the Quartet? Is it still the right mechanism? Should we look into finding a new modality of international involvement in trying to push for Israeli-Palestinian peace, perhaps with different countries, different actors?
Come on, it's 30 years since Oslo. And the Quartet has been out of action for less than a year for the obvious reason we all know. There is a day after here. We are not dismantling institutional frameworks just for the fun of it, to reestablish it after. And we are not kind of switching around on all sorts of different formats. This is not a conflict about formats, and formats will never give necessarily any progress. But the quartet cannot work according to what was the baseline for the obvious reasons. What UN is doing in this situation, we are obviously keeping all these lines open. I mean, Russia is a part of the Security Council as a permanent member, and obviously the UN is keeping all these lines open because we are not going to kind of create a vacuum here. We are going to keep the ability to remodulate and reestablish as soon as we can. We are not the master of that timing.
Yeah. Going from the international community back to the on-the-ground developments and talking about civil society, because when official peace talks are stuck or not happening, it is about ordinary citizens sometimes taking the lead. And in the Israeli-Palestinian context, we see for decades NGOs, activists from civil society trying to work together to advance a better future. Unfortunately, not enough interaction, cooperation is happening on the civil society level. Do you see importance in the role that civil society could play in the current context? What could be its contribution to advancing peace, and how the UN could support it? We see the American funding now being elevated to NGOs and people-to-people activities. What could be a specific role for the UN in helping peace NGOs in Israel and Palestine?
Well, before I answer the last question, I would like to comment on the first one. I think there is way too little interaction between Israeli NGOs and civil society and the international community NGOs. Israeli NGOs should do more with Europe. I think it is needed to have a European outreach on which Israel traditionally have not been very good at any level, but it goes also for the civil society level. Well, the same goes for the Palestinians, because I think there has to be a recreation of a narrative for peace that you need to have a foundation for in Europe and in US, as well as other places. And it is in that context the civil society is important. So then the next question is, how can you do it on ground? Well, that is difficult at the moment, because the more tense the situation is, the higher the price is for a direct interaction between civil society in Israel and in Palestine. And I think, to be honest with you, I think the Palestinians are more in the squeeze. There is very little room for maneuver, the way the conflict looks at the moment, for Palestinian civil society to have an outreach that I think they should have had. I'm not quite sure how a new government in Israel will interact with the Israeli civil society. That remains to be seen. But generally, the civil society in this region is under pressure. And I'm saying this not only from being here, but I'm saying it from my experiences in other parts of this region, for example, like Egypt, in the time of turmoil and change, where the civil society was superbly important, and it took very little time for it all to evaporate and disappear. I saw civil society people in Libya being killed, people I knew very well. So there is a risk, but there is a necessity. But there is also a necessity to kind of interact between political parties and the civil society. So the third question was, what can the UN do? Well, I mean, to the extent we can facilitate some of the more complicated contacts between the two sides, we will be looking at how to do that. We will be looking at how to fund it, and we will be looking at where it will be most productive and where, in a way, there is more room for maneuver. I would generally say that there is a language between women organization, where there normally is a space for a different dialogue than it is more generally among other part of civil society, whether it is human rights-based or other-based. And I'm saying this because I know that part of the Palestinian system. Even under pressure, there is more space. So we'll see what to do with that. And again, I mean, I'm looking at the capacity we have as UNESCO, but I'm looking also to what capacity there is generally in the UN system on ground, and that capacity exists.
Thank you. And the final questions. We heard at the beginning of this conference, the Director General of the MFA, Alon Ushpiz, talk about the big breakthroughs between Israel and the Arab world. And we saw it within the context of the Negev Forum and also the Israel-Lebanon deal, but none of this development was somehow linked to progress on the Palestinian track, rather the opposite. Do you see a way in which diplomatic successes between Israel and their neighbors in the region could be somehow leveraged to advance peacemaking between Israelis and the Palestinians, or to a lower extent, even advancing living conditions or the well-being of our Palestinian neighbors? Is there a linkage between Abraham Accords normalization and Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking?
Not yet, but that may come. There is no clear leveraging mechanism for the moment of the normalization accords. I think they will have to develop further, and I think there is a national interest among the Arab countries that are involved to improve clearly on their relationship to Israel. I would expect that any government in Israel, also one led by Bibi Netanyahu, will expand on these things and try to include other Arab countries, and in particular, so Saudi. So that's number one. The second issue is, can it be leveraged? I think it can. But we need to see, where is it important for the Palestinians to leverage these agreements, and where is it important to kind of remobilize the link between the Palestinians and the Arab world? Because it's a fact that when these agreements came into being, the Palestinians, in a way, lost the Arab world because they tried to defeat it. And that didn't work. And there is a lot of work of repair that needs to be ongoing. I can see very clearly that there is an American strategy to leverage the normalization agreement. And I noticed with a high degree of interest that during President Biden's visit to here, there was a successful intervention by the Americans to refund the East Jerusalem hospital network as a part of leveraging the contacts the Americans had and Israel had with the region. But this is a process where there will be a need for time. There need to be a reset between the Palestinian authorities and the Arab world, and the Palestinian Authority needs that to happen fast. It remains to be seen how fast it will be done, and I think there needs to be a push from others as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also saw the credit given by the Americans to Morocco on the Allenby crossing issue with Jordan. So there was another proactive attempt to kind of show the linkage that Morocco can bring into Palestinian living conditions. Mr. Wennseland, thank you so much for being here with us, and please go on and pursue peace in our region and help us bring stability and prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.